Jerry Michael Mike Williams. He'd spend the morning indulging in his favorite pastime, and that night he and his wife Denise would celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary. When Mike is late getting home, friends, family, and authorities launch a desperate search for him, but to no avail. Mike has vanished. It would take 17 years before Mike and the sinister truth about what happened to him emerged. Hello and welcome to The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love. And this week I'm putting a spotlight on the case I'm calling My Best Friend's Murder. Jerry Michael Williams and his older brother Nick grow up in a double-wide trailer in Bradfordville, Florida, a little north of Tallahassee, with their dad, also named Jerry, who drove a bus for Greyhound, and their mom, Cheryl, who worked in daycare. Like so many parents, the Williams were determined that their boys would have a better life than they did. So they worked the night shift at the grocery store in order to send their boys to North Florida Christian High School, a private school in Tallahassee. Mike, as Jerry was known, was elected student council president, played for the football team, ran track, and was a member of the Key Club, a service organization for high school students. With his brown hair and slim 5'10", 165-pound frame, he was known to be outgoing and was extremely well-liked, not only by the kids in the neighborhood, but by his fellow students at North Florida Christian. So much so, he was eventually voted best personality by his classmates. Like most teenagers, high school was an important time in Mike's life, and there were two major things that happened to him during this time. One, he became obsessed with duck hunting, and two, he met fellow student Denise Merrill. He couldn't have known it at the time, but both would have a profound impact on his life. In his book, Evil at Lake Seminole, author Stephen B. Epstein described Denise as a, quote, whip-smart, pencil-thin, blonde-haired girl. She came from a family of 4 girls named Deanne, Darla, and Deborah. Just like Mike's family, Denise's family was also intent on sending their 4 girls to private school and scrimped and saved to afford the tuition at North Florida Christian. The Merrills were also known to be a devoutly Baptist family, attending church twice on Sundays and at least one day during the week, taking the front pew so that everyone would notice what a fine and upstanding bunch they were. Denise, like Mike, was also civic-minded. Serving as student council secretary, she was also a cheerleader, a finalist for homecoming queen, and her classmates declared her best dressed. In the Merrill family, appearances mattered, and Stephen B. Epstein noted in his book that the 4 Merrill girls gained a rep of sorts for never leaving the house as being anything less than, quote, immaculately dressed and well-groomed, so Denise came by this best dressed honorific naturally. Once Mike and Denise started dating, she worked her wiles on him to get him to upgrade his wardrobe from his standard Kmart and Sears to a cooler look that was more Miami Vice. For her part, Mike's mom, Cheryl, she really liked Denise, viewing her as exactly the sort of good, clean girl that her son should end up with. She was smart, from a good family, attended church regularly. She was perfection personified. As Cheryl told Stephen B. Epstein about Denise, she found her son's girlfriend to be, quote, beautiful, friendly, and crazy about Mike. Cheryl's affection for Denise ran so deep, she even bought Denise flowers for her birthday every year. Cheryl wasn't the only member of the Williams family showering Denise with love and affection. Mike is crazy about Denise. As Mike's first love, coincidentally also named Denise, told Stephen B. Epstein, he was, quote, one of the most genuine, nicest people I've ever met. She said that Mike would do anything for Denise. However, when she'd ask about some of the things that Denise would do for him, Mike was hard-pressed to come up with anything. Bottom line, Mike is in love, and nothing will deter him from Denise. Another seminal event that happened to Mike during his early days at NFC was meeting Brian Winchester. Denise and Brian had actually known each other since their preschool days at Parkway Baptist Church and became friends during their middle school years. Unlike Mike and Denise, Brian's family didn't have to pinch pennies to send him to NFC, as his father was in the financial industry. In addition to money, Brian had the looks, described by Stephen B. Epstein as, quote, the epitome of tall, dark, and handsome, able to stop girls in their tracks just by flashing his killer smile. Mike and Brian were on opposite ends of the spectrum in many ways, from their backgrounds to their personalities. Mike was a hard worker, busting his tail at multiple jobs from stocking shelves to rolling pennies, while Brian already had the polos and designer jeans that Mike scrimped for. There were luxury vacations and weekends spent on his family's ski boat. But despite these differences, Mike and Brian were extremely close friends, even sharing Mike's duck hunting hobby together. One way that Brian emulated Mike was to also fall for a cheerleader by the name of Kathy Aldridge. Interestingly enough, Mike had also dated Kathy in the interim between Denise number 1 and Denise number 2. There don't seem to be any hard feelings, though, because the two couples become pals, spending practically all of their time together. When it came time for college, though, Mike's grades didn't grant him immediate entry into Florida State, where the rest of the gang was headed. Instead, he earned a modest track scholarship from Florida A&M University while he lived at home. While he may not be going to FSU, he's got Denise, his best buddy Brian, and he is going to college. So, as far as Mike's concerned, things are just A1 in his world. Except for when, out of the blue, Denise cut him loose. It was during their freshman year of college, and Mike, understandably, was shattered over the loss of his high school sweetheart, the beautiful girl he had put on a pedestal for so many years, the girl that his mother was buying birthday flowers for. After drowning in despair for a few months, not even duck hunting was enough to get him out of the house, Mike finally rebounded with a gorgeous blonde named Shelley. Now, Shelley, unlike Denise, doted on Mike. She loved giving him gifts and would even go over to his mom Cheryl's daycare to play with the kids, which was not something that Denise had done a whole lot of. While all the signs pointed to snatch this girl up and don't let her go, Mike just couldn't get over Denise. And, of course, once Denise heard about Shelley, she, of course, wanted Mike back, which meant Shelley was out, Denise was in, and all was right with Mike's world. After a year at FAMU, Mike was able to get his grades up enough to join his friends at FSU. He took on a double major in urban planning and political science, while Denise majored in accounting. A fellow Seminole, that's FSU mascot, turned Mike on to Ketchum Appraisal Group, where he eventually landed a part-time job. The owner, Clay Ketchum, took Mike under his wing and taught him the appraisal business from the ground up. Mike took to it so quickly, when he graduated, he became a full-time employee, doing appraisals for both commercial and residential buildings. Denise, meanwhile, took an accounting position with the state of Florida, while their friends Brian and Kathy each joined their families' businesses in financial planning and printing, respectively. So everyone's graduated, everyone has jobs. Only thing to do now is get married. Mike chose a 2-carat stunner from Tiffany's for Denise, and the two looked forward to walking down the aisle. The bliss of the day, however, was overshadowed by the massive heart attack Mike's dad had the morning of the wedding. Despite this, he urged the lovebirds to get married, and on December 17, 1994, Mike and Denise tied the knot. Brian was a groomsman, and his now wife, Kathy, was a bridesmaid. Fortunately, Mike's dad survived, and Mike and Denise settled into married life. His job with Ketchum Appraisal Group was going gangbusters, and he was described by his boss, Clay, as an extremely hard worker, putting in 15-hour days and often returning to the office to put in a few more hours after heading home to have dinner with Denise. There was time for play, though, as Mike, Denise, Brian, and Kathy became glued at the hip, going on double dates to dinner, concerts, movies, a couple things. Mike is also still consumed with his duck hunting hobby, going whenever he can. There are times even he goes before work, so he's really, really into duck hunting. By all accounts, Mike put Denise on a pedestal. If she needed gas, he'd leave the office and go fill the tank for her. And as his boss Clay joked to 48 Hours, quote, "We all want to be married to Mike. Mike's a great guy, great husband. Who wouldn't want Mike for a husband?" 1999 would bring a huge change to Mike and Denise's life when their daughter Ansley is born. By all accounts, Mike is a loving and devoted father, doting on the little girl and pushing himself to work even harder in order to provide for her. And all of that hard work is paying off, as Mike is making about $200,000 a year. He and Denise have bought a nice house in a nice neighborhood, and his buddy Brian, who, as I mentioned, works in financial services, sell Mike and Denise a $1 million life insurance policy. According to Mike's mom, Cheryl, he was even thinking about taking a year off, and there was talk of another baby. As their friend Hallie Jasper told People magazine Investigates, the Williams were, quote, "the Facebook family," as in perfect. On the morning of December 16th, Mike did what he always did, which was to go duck hunting at Lake Seminole. He told Denise he'd be home around noon, and then they would head out to St. George Island to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. Noon arrives, but no Mike. Denise starts calling folks looking for her husband, eventually calling her dad and another friend, Damon, and they agree to head out to Lake Seminole to search for Mike. When they get there, they find Mike's truck, a 1994 Ford Bronco, but no Mike. Now, there are some legitimate reasons to be worried. Lake Seminole is huge, spanning 37,500 acres of water and a nearly 400-mile shoreline. And because it's Florida, it's a swamp. And there are alligators in Lake Seminole. So, lots of reasons to be freaking out. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission launched an official search for what was being termed as a missing hunter versus any kind of foul play. During the search, Mike's boat was found on the water with his duck decoys and rifle inside. But no Mike. The initial theory was that Mike must have fallen overboard and drowned, the heavy rubber waders that duck hunters wear essentially suctioning him to the water, leaving him unable to swim or do much of anything. Because authorities thought they were looking for a missing hunter originally, they didn't treat his boat, his car, anything as a crime scene. So nothing was preserved, no evidence was collected, there was no dusting for prints, nobody is questioned. After 10 days of exhaustive searching, something finally does turn up. It's a fishing hat, though no one can say definitively that it belongs to Mike. Finally, in early February, the search is called off, though authorities kept the case open, noting that they couldn't find any evidence of an accident or fatality of any kind. Mike was just gone. This didn't sit right with some, as bodies typically surface within 3 to 7 days. Some thought maybe he got tangled up in the lake's hydrilla beds on the bottom of the lake, while some speculated that Mike left on purpose, took off to start a new life under a new name, but as anyone who knows Mike knows, that really is not like him at all. He's too devoted to Denise. He's too devoted to the baby. He wouldn't do this. Or maybe the reason Mike's body hasn't been recovered was because the alligators of Lake Seminole ate him. As David Arnett of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission told the Tallahassee Democrat, quote, "Everyone knows the lake is full of alligators. You look for other answers. Why hasn't the body appeared?" Why indeed? During the search for Mike, Denise was not plastered across the airways pleading for anyone to come forward with information about her husband or blasting investigators for calling off the search. In fact, she never even came to help with the search, although it should be noted that Brian Winchester did. Instead, as the Tallahassee Democrat reported, had Denise pushed for the search to keep going, the search would have kept going. Instead, the day after the search was called off, Denise held a memorial service for Mike. Not long after this quickie memorial service, Denise's next order of business was to collect on Mike's life insurance policies, which came to about $1.75 million. Except Because Mike was never declared officially dead, there was no death certificate. And if you want to collect on life insurance, you need a death certificate. She's told it will take 5 years for Mike to be declared legally dead and for a death certificate to be issued. So, curiously, around June 2001, which the search for Mike ended in February of that year, so that June, a pair of waders show up floating around Lake Seminole. Well, of course, this offers a sliver of hope, and divers are called in to do a more extensive search. And on the lake's floor, they find a hunting jacket and a flashlight that still worked. A subsequent search of the jacket revealed a paper hunting license with Mike Williams' name and his perfectly intact signature. Now, if this piece of paper has been in the lake 6 months or more, it stands to reason that not only would the signature be obliterated, the whole damn piece of paper would be obliterated. I mean, look, you run a piece of paper through the washing machine, it's done, it's toast. And a piece of paper that's been sitting in the swamp for 6 months is totally fine? No. Okay, not only that, the other items, the waders, the jacket, totally clean, like new. No slime, no algae, no teeth marks from any fish or turtles or alligators. Nothing. It's almost as if someone just dropped them in the water. Still, this evidence, it's my air quotes around evidence, this evidence is deemed sufficient enough for a judge to grant Denise's petition to declare Mike legally dead, which means she gets the death certificate she needs in order to collect the $1.75 million from her husband's life insurance policies. So while Denise may have been ready to move on, her mother-in-law Cheryl just can't accept that her son is dead. Cheryl essentially makes finding out what happened to Mike her full-time job. As 48 Hours reported, over the years, she wrote the governor of Florida, whoever the governor was at the time, she wrote that person a letter every day. She took out ads in the newspaper, stood on street corners with signs, bought billboards, all with the same message: help me find my son. As she told the Tallahassee Democrat, God has not told me that child is dead. I feel like I would know in my heart that he is dead. Denise, for her part, wanted no part of Cheryl's campaign for the truth, and as the Tallahassee Democrat reported, even went so far as to tell her mother-in-law that if she didn't give it up, she was cutting off her access to her granddaughter Ansley. However, nothing could deter Cheryl, and she plowed ahead with trying to find out what happened to her son. Getting no cooperation from Denise and total disinterest from law enforcement, TV station WJHG reported that according to Cheryl, quote, Fish and Game told me to my face, Mrs. Williams, I don't like to tell a mother that her son got eaten by alligators. Cheryl hires her own search firm, including an alligator expert, who tells her that this alligator theory doesn't add up for 2 reasons. 1, alligators don't feed in the winter because it's too cold, and at the time of year that Mike disappeared, December, alligators are hibernating. 2nd, he said if an alligator were to eat a person, there would be something left behind. The experts' conclusions provide the first real ray of hope for Cheryl, and in 2004, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement finally launches a formal, full-scale investigation into Mike's disappearance. Denise, meanwhile, has all the way moved on with Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. You're shocked by this, right? Brian had divorced his wife Kathy in 2005 and married Denise later that same year. He even moved into the same house that Mike and Denise shared as husband and wife, which is kind of tacky, like go get your own house. That's just gross. As journalist Dorothy Dix said, quote, drying a widow's tears is one of the most dangerous occupations known to man. Except record scratch. Brian and Denise started having an affair in 1997, about 3 years into Denise's marriage to Mike. Oh, but wait, there's more. Of course, there's more. That's why we're here. So, as the Washington Post reported, according to Brian, It all started, the affair, when he and his then wife Kathy, Denise and Mike, went to a Sister Hazel concert. While Mike and Kathy were parking the car, Brian and Denise were inside sharing their first kiss. So once that horse was out of the barn, these two were banging the gong during every spare moment, taking clandestine romantic trips to New York, South Beach, and Destin, which is in Florida. And if Mike or Kathy were out of town, Brian and Denise were sneaking into each other's houses to bang the gong. Oh, but wait, there's more. It's the gift that keeps on giving, because not only were Denise and Brian having an affair, at one point, Denise and Kathy had a fling. Now, depending on who you believe, Brian, who says it happened during a spring break trip to Panama City after Mike disappeared, but before he and Denise got married, or Kathy, who says it happened before Mike vanished. Either way, Denise no longer seems to be the fresh-scrubbed church girl sitting in the front pew every Sunday. Okay, so anyway, Brian and Denise are married. Authorities are still investigating Mike's disappearance, but nothing is happening. There's no movement, and again, Mike is just gone. And it seems like the truth about Mike and what happened to him will never come out. Fast forward to 2012. Brian and Denise have been married for 7 years, but decide to separate because, among other things, apparently, Brian claimed to be a sex addict. However, as time goes on, the longer he and Denise are separated, Brian starts to go a little cuckoo clock, as in super paranoid, freaking out, because he and his estranged wife share a secret about, you guessed it, what happened to Mike Williams. And he's afraid she might spill this nasty little secret to the cops. On August 5th, 2016, Brian decides to take matters into his own hands. He needs to stop Denise from telling what she knows about Mike. So in his infinite wisdom, at around 2:30 in the morning, he climbs into the back seat of her car, hides under a tarp, and waits. Denise gets into her car to go to work as usual, and she's on the phone with her sister, and they're talking, and she all of a sudden sees someone climb over the back seat of her car. So Brian, who's been waiting all these hours for Denise, snatches the phone out of her hand and makes it clear to her that he means business by showing her the gun that he has. Brian claims that this is the only way to talk to her because she has blocked his text messages and wouldn't answer the phone when he called. Brian tells Denise to start driving, and he's screaming directions at her about where he wants her to go, but instead, because nobody tells Denise what to do, she pulls into a parking lot of a CVS, right by the door where there's tons of people, in and out, a camera in the parking lot, the whole thing. At some point, Brian tells Denise that the real reason he had the gun was because he planned to take himself out, not her, and that he doesn't want to get divorced and he's got nothing left to live for if she doesn't take him back. In order to keep Brian from going completely off the rails and killing them both, Denise promises they can put the marriage back together, and crucially, she won't tell the police what she knows about Mike's disappearance. Well, as soon as she gets Brian to calm down, everything's fine, everything's great, the house is not burning down, Denise drives Brian back to his truck, and get this, he had with him in Denise's car 2 sheets, I guess one was a bed sheet, the other was a plastic sheet, a spray bottle full of bleach, and a tool of some kind. Now, this does not sound like someone who is planning to take himself out, but that's just me. As soon as Brian and all of his apparatus are out of her car, Denise beelines for the sheriff's office and files a kidnapping report. And that's when the S hits the F. So investigators, all this time, they have always suspected that Denise had something to do with Mike's disappearance, but everything they had was circumstantial. You know, everything from the way she pushed to get the insurance money, not pressing to continue the search, the quickie memorial service for Mike, like the day after investigators call off the search. I mean, it's crap behavior, right? But it's not enough to lock her up. But now, authorities have Denise in the interrogation room, ostensibly to talk about Brian kidnapping her, but they say, hey, you know what? We're not going to waste this opportunity to crack her open like a nut and find out what happened to Mike. Despite their best efforts, though, Denise is sticking to her story. Mike died at Lake Seminole. Brian didn't have anything to do with it, and can we get back to him kidnapping me, please? Well, Denise may be keeping her mouth shut, but Brian, not so much, because he tells everything. Everything. So Brian goes on trial for kidnapping Denise, and during that trial, she gives her victim impact statements, very tearful statement in court, where she says she wants him to go to prison for the rest of his life because he threatened to kill her and begged the court to choose her life over Brian's. So Brian wasn't sentenced to life, but instead was sentenced to 20 years, which was kind of stunning. What people didn't know is that before Brian was sentenced, he confessed that he had killed Mike at Denise's behest. In exchange for pleading guilty to the kidnapping and turning on Denise, he avoided a life sentence for the kidnapping charge. Finally, 17 long years after leaving home to go duck hunting, what happened to Mike Williams would finally be told. December 16th, 2000. Mike and Brian met up early that morning at a gas station to go duck hunting together. Brian testified that during a previous trip, Mike fell into a mud hole and that the mud sucked him down so fast that Mike was in real trouble. And that, crazily, sparked a thought in Brian's head that, what if Denise and I kill Mike? Okay, sure. Now, Denise's big motivation for why she wanted Mike dead was that she absolutely, unequivocally did not want to get a divorce. Why? Well, her religious background, for one. When you got married, you stayed married. 2, she was not interested in sharing custody of Ansley, who was 18 months at the time. And of course, number 3 was the money, all of those millions of dollars, courtesy of those hefty life insurance policies that Brian sold them. And 4, now this one might be my personal favorite. It's because nobody feels bad for a divorcee, but everyone will feel sorry for a widow. As Brian testified, better to be a rich widow than a poor divorcee. Ooh. Okay, so now the moment is here. Brian and Mike on a boat in the middle of Lake Seminole in the early morning quiet, just the two of them. And that's when Brian forced Mike to stand up before he shoved his best friend out of the boat, believing his waders would suck him down like quicksand and he'd drown. Quick, easy, no fuss, no muss. Except Mike was able to get out of those waders and his jacket. Brian panicked. He took his 12-gauge shotgun and shot his best friend in the face. Mike Williams was 31 years old. Brian dragged Mike's body to his car, throwing a tarp that he had in his trunk over the body. He went to Walmart and purchased weights, another tarp, and a shovel, having remembered a hunting spot on Carr Lake, which was about 10 minutes from his house. He drove out there in search of a mud hole that Mike Williams would not be able to escape, and left him there for 17 long years. And when authorities uncovered Mike's remains, he was still wearing his wedding ring. After burying Mike, Brian staged the scene with the waders, the jacket, the flashlight that still worked, leaving the boat out on the water, Mike's car, all to throw investigators off the trail so that they and everyone would think Mike had perished in some horrible boating accident. And for 17 years, it worked. Finally, authorities had all the evidence they needed to arrest Denise. And they did arrest her on May 18, 2018, as she was leaving her job at Florida State University to celebrate her daughter Ansley's 19th birthday. She was indicted by a grand jury on charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. Denise was denied bond and her trial was set for September 24th. The star witness, of course, was Brian, who testified, among other things, that they had mused about staging an accident to murder not only Mike, but his ex-wife Kathy, too. But since Kathy was the mother of his children, Brian scratched that idea. According to Brian, they ran through a number of scenarios before finally deciding on the boating accident that he was going to stage. The trial lasted 4 days, and after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Denise guilty on all charges. Denise said nothing on her behalf. No tearful pleadings for mercy, no sobbing for forgiveness, no apologies, just stone. In February of 2019, Denise was sentenced to life in prison. Later that year, Denise signed over all of Mike's estate and money from the insurance to her daughter Ansley so as to avoid being prosecuted for insurance fraud. Ansley was forbidden to use any of that money for her mother's legal fees. In 2020, Denise appealed her conviction and life sentence because her attorney argued that there was no evidence to support that she actually conspired with Brian to murder Mike, that he acted alone. In the end, the murder conviction was overturned, but the conspiracy charges stood, including the 30-year sentence that went along with it, which she has to serve 85% of if she would want to be considered for parole. Denise is currently serving her sentence at the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala, while Brian is incarcerated at Madison Correctional Institution in Madison. He's scheduled to be released in 2036. Denise and Brian's divorce was finalized in 2017. The search for the truth about what happened to Mike cost his mother, Cheryl, everything. She drained her bank accounts, she physically has trouble getting around, and she's also lost her relationship with her granddaughter after Denise maliciously cut her off because she wouldn't stop looking for Mike. As Cheryl told WJHG-TV, quote, "She was all we had left of Mike. So Denise, not only did she kill Mike, she stole Ansley." Unfortunately, according to the Tallahassee Democrat, Cheryl and her granddaughter Ansley have not reconciled. Still, the long, broken road was worth it. As Cheryl told the Tallahassee Democrat, quote, "Michael has justice. I've been so afraid that she would get out. I believe he can rest in peace now." Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. Also, while you're there, you can find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus episodes and other fun stuff. Learn about my suspense novels about the dark side of love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.